It is my great pleasure to introduce Kate Roos tonight. Kate is an art therapist and a trauma-sensitive yoga facilitator. She's the founder of Expressive Arts for Wellbeing, an organization that offers classes and workshops for teens, adults, and families to support healing and to promote well-being through expressive arts. Kate is very active in the community. In fact, Jeanette Kibler heard Kate speak at a Circles program recently and said, "Oh, Kate would just be perfect for our Compassionate Care series." I've known Kate for over 20 years. Our children are friends, and she's been a great tennis partner. So thanks. Thanks for coming. It's a pleasure to have you here. Yes.
Maybe.
Should we take it up a little? This was that week.
Did you say yes or no?
He said he should take it up a little bit. It's okay, I think.
That's all it'll do.
Okay, that's all right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so to start with, thank you, Barb, and thanks to Jeanette. There you are. And I'm very happy to be here tonight. And I see another Circles member, former member. But before I begin, I just have to correct a couple of things because in different places I saw myself billed as having a master's in social work. I don't. And at one point I saw myself with a PhD, and I'm saving that for my next life. And I am not related to Roos Roast Coffee. So,
That's too bad. Yeah.
it is too bad. I drink lobster butter every morning. So, but I am an art therapist, and I'm a certified trauma-sensitive yoga facilitator. And we are going to talk about trauma and relationships tonight, but I feel compelled to say I'm not an expert in this. I mean, it is something that I'm very interested in and I've been interested in for years. It's just about our brain and our nervous system and how it can be affected by influences and relationships around us, and our ability to change. So, with that, tonight we're talking about the impact of traumatic experiences on relationships. And from the very beginning of human civilization, most or many of our experiences have been traumatic. Our earliest ancestors must have been constantly under stress to meet their basic survival needs, finding food, water, shelter, as well as threats from saber-toothed tigers, neighboring clans and tribes, weather, earthquakes, and volcanoes. Our brain and central nervous system developed to give early humans living in hostile environments the best chance at surviving, which required reacting quickly as possible to threats. Today, our nervous system is still primed to react when we feel threatened, and our brain sounds the alarm. However, in 2023, we know that this alarm system, which has enabled humans to survive for about 300,000 years now, relies on the most primitive part of our brain, which is the amygdala. A little almond-shaped, what happened? Something happened.
We took it down just a little.
Oh, so I'm okay.
You're good.
Okay.
You're perfect.
Okay, so the amygdala is just a little almond-shaped piece in the middle of our brain. But it amplifies our emotions when we feel threatened to cause us to react. However, the system we now know is flawed, and we individually and in relationship to others in society are suffering the consequences. I have to turn it on.
You're gonna have to stand a little bit away from, because, yeah, because your shadow is covering part of the screen when you're right in front of it. Now you're good. You're perfect.
All right. So tonight, to begin this talk about, I have to talk about relationships, and because that is the key to everything we do in our lives. If you think about today, when were you in relationship with others? Maybe you live with somebody, so someone was there when you woke up this morning. Maybe you went to work. Maybe you saw colleagues. Perhaps you drove to work or ran an errand. All of these activities would have brought you into relationships with others. Do you have a pet?
Yes.
Yeah. That's a very important relationship. So the image that I'm suggesting is that many of us are in relationship to others most of our days. Relationships are the yarn that connects all of us and weaves us together. But the most important relationship that affects all other relationships is your relationship to yourself. So I'll ask you, how are you feeling right now? Maybe you're tired. It's Monday night. Most of us probably have had long days. How was your day? It might have been stressful. Maybe it was energizing. Did something unexpected happen? How did what happened in your day and how you felt about it affect how you reacted to others? If you were stressed, you might have been a little impatient when you were driving, or a little less understanding of a colleague or a partner or a friend. We've all been there, and I'm not judging. I'm suggesting that bringing awareness to how you feel might also bring awareness in any given moment of how you might relate to others. Your relationship to yourself might determine, sorry. This isn't my computer. Well, anyway, your relationship to yourself is going to determine how you relate to other people. The next is, what is trauma? So here I have a list of different kinds of trauma. Many of us think of trauma as PTSD, which is more related to single event trauma. Or if you were in a war or in an accident, it is something that happened to you. And as time goes on, and more research is done into trauma and brain and nervous system responses, there are more perspectives on what trauma is. So it might be easier to think about trauma as acute or single incident trauma. There's complex or developmental trauma, which is what happens when a child grows up in a family where there's abuse, neglect. There might be violence in the neighborhood where a child does not feel safe. There is historic, collective, intergenerational trauma. That is trauma that might be passed on from one generation to the next. If we think of World War II, and the refugees. There was trauma passed from people who experienced the war onto their children. Vicarious trauma is experiencing trauma through somebody else, perhaps a loved one who has had a traumatic event. And there is the everyday chronic stress trauma. If you are just constantly feeling stressed to your max, it will create a traumatic response in your body. And intersectional trauma is what it says, the intersection of multiple traumas. If you are a member of a marginalized group or population who constantly feels oppression, that can chronically be affect your body, that can be experienced as trauma. If you experience poverty, that is experienced as trauma. And if you add on top of that traumatic incident or event, you have a person who is very vulnerable and their resilience is being broken down. For our purposes tonight, though, it's not necessary to know how a trauma happened to somebody, but instead understand that trauma impacts our minds and bodies and how we react to the people and the environment around us. So, in your Stephen ministry, from what was said at the beginning, I have a feeling you know that sometimes just being with the person is the most important thing of all. It's not necessary to know what happened to the person. But for today, I selected Psychology Today's definition of trauma. It is a more event-focused definition. Trauma is a person's emotional response to a distressing experience. Unlike ordinary hardships, traumatic events tend to be sudden and unpredictable, involve a serious threat to life, and feel beyond a person's control. That's an important element of a traumatic experience. Most importantly, events are traumatic to the degree that they undermine a person's sense of safety in a world and create a sense that catastrophe could strike at any time. So to have your safety compromised, feel that the world around you is out of control, that it is going to affect you, and anything can happen anytime, all contribute to experiencing trauma. I think I have water over you just a moment. So more ideas about trauma. Trauma may happen within the context of relationships. Domestic abuse is an example of that. Trauma may be experienced as a loss of power or agency. Again, that could be a marginalized group. It could be within the context of a relationship. Trauma may be experienced differently by each person. So this is also important because you and I might experience the same event. I might experience it as trauma, and you might not. So I will walk away with some lasting impact, and you'll be okay. So this is a result of each person's individual experiences as well as your DNA. So here is a very simple neuroscience of trauma. So I hope there's no scientists in the room. So during an experience that is perceived as life-threatening, our neural system goes into survival mode to meet a hierarchy of needs. Our amygdala turns on the alarm to alert the neural system. Our prefrontal cortex is sidelined for purposes of expediency. Adrenaline and cortisol are released as a stress response is initiated. Our heart rate might increase and our respiration increases. Oxygen flows to our muscles, and the neural system disconnects our brain from our body, so it's possible to act instinctively and reflexively without losing time to cognitive thought. Our response is to fight, flee, freeze, fold, or fawn. So essentially, when trauma is happening, we're not thinking, we're reacting. In the aftermath of trauma, the amygdala may continue to turn on the alarm, even when there is no reason to have the alarm bell ringing. Because the prefrontal cortex shut down, memories of the experience may be fragmented, or there may be no conscious memory of what happened, depending on the severity and kind of trauma. And trauma is more likely to be remembered in the form of sensory elements without words. We might remember trauma with our feelings and in our bodies. And trauma can be language-less, which is something in my work as an art therapist and a trauma-sensitive yoga facilitator, I work with all the time. I'm working without language. I'm working where people are connecting with the experiences in their body that they're not necessarily familiar with, and they don't know what's there until they start moving and connecting and expressing. So, following trauma in stressful situations, people might have a hyperarousal event, which means that when they feel stressed, they might react in anger, they might become very anxious, they might feel out of control, overwhelmed, they might have the fight or flight response, even though the stress is relatively minor. Their brain and nervous system react as if an event, a traumatic event, is still happening. The other response that we might not think about as much is if you're stressed and you've experienced trauma, you might zone out. You might feel numb, frozen, you might shut down and just feel spacey and not recognize that this is a response to stress. So, what I'm going to talk about, I actually have a handout for this, I'll give you, but is the window of tolerance. So we all, every one of us in this room, have something that's called the window of tolerance, and it's that place within us where we're very comfortable. We feel like life is good, we can handle anything. It's like being on a little vacation on an island. We're just fine to rest there. When we are within our window of tolerance, we feel more resilient. The day might get stressful, but we feel like we can handle it. Even as the stress increases, we're still feeling pretty okay about it. So that's our window of tolerance. If somebody has experienced a lot of stress in their life, their window of tolerance might be much narrower. So when a stressful event happens, they quickly go into either hyperarousal or hypoarousal. So this is the window of tolerance. So what they're indicating with the arrows is how it can widen and narrow depending upon your experience. So when I am working with somebody, what I'm trying to do is see where their window of tolerance is. Because the work happens when somebody is within their window of tolerance. If they start experiencing our time together, our relationship together, as too stressful, they might become anxious, or they might just start shutting down. At that point, I've lost them. But part of the work is trying to expand the window of tolerance. So a person might become more resilient. So my trauma-sensitive yoga work, they have developed a format using these 5 elements. So this was data-based research, and they have developed this as a way to work with people's resilience, tolerance, without words. So they focus on invitational language. So during a yoga practice, if you've been in a yoga class or any kind of class, there's usually the teacher who is showing you or instructing what you should do. In a trauma-sensitive yoga group, instead they would invite you. They would suggest that perhaps you would like to do this practice seated, or maybe you'd like to stand. It's up to you. So it's always an invitation. It's never a direction. There's always choice. So I might say, maybe you would like to lift your arm. Maybe you would like to lift your arm above your head. Or perhaps you would like to lift your arm in front of you. It's your choice. It's up to you. So particularly working with people who have experienced trauma, it's very important to give them choice over how they move their bodies. The other part is non-coercion, which is not directing people, not telling them what to do. And self-awareness. So self-awareness is where a person's internal self-awareness, another name is interoception, is your felt sense inside your body. Like right now, as you're sitting, your legs might be feeling stiff or tired. That's part of your felt sense. When you move your arms or legs, if you're like me, sometimes you're a little sore. And that's my awareness, that's my interoception, my awareness of my body. Some people who have experienced severe trauma do not have a felt sense of their body. So in a trauma-sensitive yoga session, we might move, and I might say, as you're moving, you might notice how your leg feels. You might notice where you're making contact with the floor. So it's inviting people to notice their physical experience of their body. And then the last thing is shared authentic experience. And I think this is the piece you really know, which is when you're with somebody, it's important to be yourself, to be aware of what's happening with yourself. So in the beginning, I was talking about relationships. So it's not only your relationship to the other person, it's also your relationship to yourself. So if I walk in and I'm tired and I'm anxious and I'm working with somebody who's also tired and anxious, I have to know how what I'm bringing into the room is going to affect the other person, just as I'm aware of how they might be feeling. So it is as important in this relationship that the other person is aware that I am experiencing feelings too. And that helps in building trust and a sense of safety. So in my work as an art therapist and trauma-sensitive yoga facilitator, when somebody walks in the room, what I try to do is create a safe environment. So when they walk in the room, I invite them to look around the room. And I have a waiting room, and then I have a larger room. And some people want to make sure the door is shut. So I invite them to shut the door. I make sure I show up as my authentic self, bringing my own awareness to how I'm feeling right now, to how I am with this person in that moment. I try to facilitate an embodied present moment experience for the participants. So asking them if they might notice something about how they feel themselves. I'm inviting noticing. What do they notice? All the time, inviting noticing, making them aware not only of themselves, but of the environment around them. I invite choice making. When somebody has a choice and they make their own choice, that's empowering. I'm not telling them what to do. They're making choices for themselves. And I invite expression and movement and art making. Again, I'm non-directive. It's non-coercive. So I am going to invite you to join me in a brief seated practice. But before that, going back to this for a moment, I guess having gone through the whole thing, and as I was putting this together for you, I was thinking, what is most important to me when I think about being with anybody, first of all, or somebody who I know has experienced trauma, or in my work. And I just kept coming back to the relationship. So first of all, being aware of how I'm feeling myself, being aware of the other person, and being aware of not reacting, but pausing and noticing how I'm feeling. If I'm feeling anxious, if I'm feeling impatient, before I react, I pause and hopefully, thoughtfully respond. So in this work, what I've discovered is that so often, many of us are reacting. And reacting is coming from our amygdala, that most primitive part of our brain. But instead, if we pause and we bring our awareness to ourselves, then we respond. And when we respond, we're being more thoughtful, which will help in connecting with another person. It will help in changing the way our body and our brain respond, not only to our environment, but to the people around us. And I was thinking grandiosely that perhaps if we're all able to move from a place of reaction to response, our brains will no longer be giving that power to our amygdala. But we will actually move to our prefrontal cortex. and being much more thoughtful in how we relate to each other. So, so I do have a brief seated practice for anybody who would like to participate. I haven't done it before with people lined up in rows. So this will just be about 7 minutes. Maybe I can you see me?
Or do we sit?
No, you sit on chairs, so, or you can stand. It's up to you. So, if I sit in a chair, can you see me?
Yes.
All right. Can everybody see me or not?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, I actually need my phone to keep time. Otherwise, I might have you here for an hour and everybody will fall asleep.
Not a bad thing.
Well, I once actually, it was with Jeanette, when I did this for the Circles program, I made the mistake of doing this at the beginning. And it was 7:30 on a Tuesday night. And by the time we finished, everybody was very relaxed. Nobody was ready to start listening to a presentation, so. All right. Okay. Well, to get started, maybe notice your feet on the floor. Maybe notice where you're resting your hands. You might be aware of your legs making contact with the chair. Maybe you notice the sensation of your back against the chair. And as we start settling in, you might look around the room to see where you are tonight. Maybe looking in front of you, behind you, maybe side to side, just bringing your awareness to where you are, who's around you. And you're welcome to keep your eyes open or your eyes closed. And perhaps you're aware you're breathing. You might be aware of your inhale, maybe your exhale. So maybe you're aware of the sensation of your lungs expanding when you inhale, perhaps releasing when you exhale. And if you'd like, you might experiment with some movement. And you might bring your breathing into this movement. So perhaps you want to extend your arms to the side. So maybe extending your arms to the side. Perhaps bringing your arms close together. Maybe your hands meeting. You can follow my movement or you can move in your own way. So perhaps opening your arms, closing your arms. Maybe there's a rhythm there, an opening, closing. Maybe your breathing is moving with your movement, maybe inhaling while you're opening, exhaling while you're closing. Maybe just breathing. Another way of moving as we pause is opening and closing your hands. So you might close your hands, open your hands. Maybe closing, perhaps opening. You might want to experiment with creating rhythm, with expanding and contracting as you open and close your hands. Maybe you're aware that you're breathing while you're opening, perhaps inhaling, closing, maybe exhaling. Again, you're welcome to follow me or find your own movement, your own rhythm. And again, bringing your awareness to your breathing. So opening on 3, closing, opening on 2, closing, opening on 1, closing. And if you'd like, you can pause whenever you're ready. Again, maybe being aware that you're breathing. Maybe noticing expanding with the inhale and releasing with the exhale. Maybe bringing awareness to the back of your chair and your back meeting. Maybe noticing where your legs and seat meet in the seat of the chair. You might be aware of your feet and your shoes on the floor. And again, bringing your awareness to your breathing, if you'd like. And if you've had your eyes closed, you might want to open them. Perhaps looking around the room. Maybe noticing your feet on the floor. Perhaps where your hands might be resting. And with this, we come to the end of our practice. So thank you. Thank you. So, unless you have any questions?
Any questions? Okay. I have one. When you do sessions like this, typically, how long do they last? And also, is it a series of however long, or there's no really?
It depends on the person. I mean, entirely depends on the person or the group. Generally, if somebody's coming for more than one session, we start with maybe 10 to 15 minutes, depending upon the person. And then build up from there. And perhaps, again, depending on the person, starting with very small movements. If it's somebody who has experienced trauma, and they don't have a lot of body awareness, just making them notice, where they are in the room. That's essential for safety. So that's why that's part of the practice is for somebody to feel safe, they need to know where they are in the space. They need to know what's around them in the space. So, but for younger people, it might be a more active practice, and there are even cards for them to choose the movements, so that they really have a lot of agency over what they're doing. And there are hour-long trauma-sensitive yoga practices, but that would be something after somebody becomes comfortable with moving and being aware of the sensations in their body, that they would be able to commit to that for an hour.
And are these typically individual sessions or often in a group?
Individual or small group. And the other thing about it is after a session, it's over. There's no discussion about what happened. That is their experience. So I'm not interpreting it. They're not discussing it with me. It is their experience to take with them when they walk out the door.
Yeah, do you work at all in tandem with a therapist at all to know if these sessions help them in their therapy also, in their talk therapy, or they're working through their trauma? I mean, is there?
Yeah, I mean, typically for somebody who's really experienced trauma, again, and is really, really struggling, I often have not taken somebody unless they're working with a therapist, so that they have a place to go with whatever might have come up or whatever they noticed or whatever they experienced. Yeah, so I'm there just to facilitate the movement, the noticing, the safety.
I'm curious about the art therapy piece of that. Do you just have like a studio space with a lot of materials?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, there have been very trauma-focused art therapy practices developed that really are about, there's a woman in Australia that I went through all her coursework, because you can do anything online now, where she takes big tables, big paper, and it's almost like the trauma-sensitive yoga on paper, where people close their eyes and they just pay attention to what they're feeling, and they choose an art material. It might be crayons or crayons or pencils, whatever they choose, and they start moving. And they're surprised often by what they do. And there are certain kinds of movements that are indicative of what state a person might be in. So, and then somebody might go through 10 pieces of paper as they're working through one feeling and onto the next and onto the next. So it's almost like you can visually see what's happening within their internal space. But you have to, provide guidance, because you don't want people to go into a place that isn't going to be manageable for them. Yes.
Do you ever work at some place like Safe House where there's been trauma and continuing trauma?
Yeah, I haven't worked there, no. I mean, but a group of traumatized young people would benefit from trauma-sensitive yoga.
Would this work also with people who would have experienced trauma, but they're also continuing to experience trauma?
Yeah, because it's a really gentle practice, because it is so much just about the individual person. It's just about where you're at and what somebody might be able to tolerate and building up your own resiliency.
I may be remembering wrong, but I think when you talked to us at Circles, did you not invite us to think about some traumas we've experienced? Or did everybody, we've all experienced trauma? No?
I think we have all experienced
Oh, yeah,
trauma, whether
yeah.
we're fully aware of it or not. I doubt I invited people to.
Yeah, well, I remember you really got the group engaged in talking with you about some things, but I don't remember exactly.
I remember that we were talking about situations people might be challenged with in their work within the Circles program.
Have you worked with people who have been diagnosed and have, mental illness and sometimes delusional? How have you done that?
I'm not sure how to respond to that. Currently, yes, I work with people with mental illness. I have not for a long time worked with people who are actively delusional.
Okay.
Yes, I'm wondering if you've worked with children at all.
I have in the past, I don't currently. So many people do, I just don't.
Yeah, and another question, where do your referrals come from? How do people hear about you?
Largely now, and I've been working on marketing, but largely now, it's just word of mouth. So,
Okay.
and right now, personally, my work, and this has come out of the pandemic, it is more geared toward groups or classes and workshops, and just using the movement and the art is a way to bring young people, particularly, who are feeling isolated, together in a very safe, non-threatening way, where they don't have to use words if they don't want to. They can just relate to each other through the movement and through the artwork, and build up a relationship in that way, which is non-threatening.
I have a granddaughter who's 16, and so she was talking about the peer-to-peer organization that they have at Pioneer, where they're, having young people talk with other people who are going through some sort of a trauma, whether it's bullying or, not getting along with friends. And it seems like this might be something that would be good for those young people to know about, too.
Thank you.
Barb.
This is a two-part question.
Okay.
One is, how often do you do this? Is it like you recommend people do it once a week, every day? That's number one. And then like after you have the session, like a yoga session, then what do you do to encourage these people to, once they leave the room, how do you take care of that trauma still that's not leaving them, it's still there? I mean, you're fine for a moment, and then what?
Well, going back to the first question, just about.
Sorry.
How often? I'm not working in a prescriptive way. So how often might if somebody is really struggling and under the care of the therapist, that might be something that the therapist and the person determines together. When someone is moving, the idea is that they are just noticing, literally noticing. Like, my shoulder feels stiff, when I twist, I feel restricted. So they are just noticing their body. Somebody is not within that moment, usually translating it into a trauma experience, hopefully. I mean, the intention is that it really is just about somebody being with their body in that moment.
Opening the window wider, or making the window wider?
Opening the window wider,
Yeah.
just being safe enough that they can feel their body. And feel like they can be in relation to another person at the same time. They are aware of how they feel.
So there's a book, Mosch Feldenkrais, Awareness Through Movement.
Yeah, there now are many.
Feldenkrais, well, this is decades ago, but
Yeah.
it's gentler than yoga.
Yeah. So now there are many body practices helping people, bring awareness to their body, because we're discovering that a lot of our aches and pains aren't just from what we have physically done. It's from the experiences we've had in our lives.
Well, thank you very much, Kate. This was very
All of you being here and giving me your attention, so thank you.
That's great.
Yeah.